Is Talk to Me really just a gross-out movie about an addict whose life is destroyed by addiction and lies? In a lot of ways, I think Mia is a fantastic allegory for addiction, and Talk to Me raises a lot of interesting questions. How much responsibility does she have for her action? I mean, once you're being manipulated by demons trapped in the fourth dimension who are trying to feed on your soul, things get out of your hands quickly. But if you invite them in, isn't it your fault? Or is it the fault of the people who peer pressured you into inviting them in? And what if these drugs, or demons, made you accidentally admit that you're gay and that whole plot thread kind of went unsolved? I'm going to get into all of these things and more in just a few minutes. I'm Basil, and this is Failing Film School. I'll start by sharing a few things that I liked about this movie, first of which being the intensity. Right off the bat, this movie tells you what to expect with a random guy named Duckett at a house party stabbing his brother and then offing himself. And then after just a little bit of exposition, we cut right to Mia and Riley coming across a dead kangaroo. Saying this out loud, I know that it doesn't sound like these two things are comparable, but the two instances here with small bits of exposition in between help set the tone for the whole movie. The horror and anxiety producing scenes like these are expertly placed in a manner that makes the movie ebb and flow very well. There is never a dull moment in this movie, and it starts with the intensity in the first few minutes. Secondly, this is a movie about relationship, and there's a significant amount of attention to detail in these relationships. Starting with Mia and Jade's family. The important takeaway from this dynamic is how honest and strong-willed Jade's family is. Jade, in fact, is the only character who doesn't use the hand, and Jade's mother is extremely direct. These interactions are used to show the strong will of the entire family. It also helps us understand the spirit's interest in Riley. Being a child, especially the child of what in this movie serves as the ideal family, Riley is something of extreme value. And among the members of the family Mia is desperately attempting to be a part of, Riley is the most valuable due to his age and vulnerability. The relationship of this family is a direct contrast to the relationship between Mia and her father. The rift from them is apparent from the very beginning, and it's painful to watch. Mia says that she can't stand being around her dad. And the reason that they've become separate is that they've been living a lie. Mia has been allowed to believe for the last 2 years that her mother's death was accidental, but both she and her father know that this isn't the case. Her father knows it literally. However, Mia and her father go on continuing to live a lie, not admitting to themselves or each other that they know that this was not an accident. Living a lie weakens you. It casts a shadow over your existence that you cannot escape until you face the truth. This shadow follows Mia and her father around for the entire movie, and it's what makes Mia vulnerable to the spirit and to the pressures of others around her. Which brings me directly into number 3, the peer pressure motif. This movie sets up its intended theme right from the beginning when Riley's best friend lights up a cigarette and hands it to Riley. Riley refuses with little hesitation. This is another display of the strong will of Riley and his family, but this isn't the last time Riley is faced with this problem. The peer pressure dynamic is a consistent plot thread throughout the movie, and you can see how Mia gains popularity by being an active participant in the hand game, and Jade is slowly isolated for her refusal. The clique behavior is a classic high school dynamic, and it nearly cost Riley his life, and it does cost Mia hers. Speaking of Mia's life, number 4 is the addiction. It isn't only the peer pressure that makes this movie a fantastic allegory for addiction. Mia's behavior throughout the movie screams addict to me. She constantly ignores warnings that things are going wrong and slowly walks down the path that this is the only thing that's valuable to her. It's the lies that Mia is living that make her vulnerable to this in the first place. When she is using, Mia can comfortably live with these lies as the real world fades away around her, until she is left with nothing else and she finally has to go to the lengths of doing the most awful thing that she can imagine to keep it going. Mia killing Riley is the addict robbing grandma. She is using him to get to her mother, or at least who she has told herself is her mother. To continue on this with number 5, the lies. As I've already mentioned, the lies the characters are living in this movie plays a key part in their vulnerability to the spirits. Mia is allowing herself to continue falsely believing the death of her mother was an accident. This lie ensures that she can't properly cope with her mother's death, and gives the spirit world ammunition it needs to manipulate her. They give her the comfort of adding evidence to the lie. Because of this, Mia has to believe that the spirits are truthful, and guiding her honest. So once they make the claim that killing Riley is the best course of action, she can't refute this, because admitting that the spirits are manipulating her destroys the comfortable world of lies that she's built for herself. The spirits have an inherent relationship with the truth, and they're very good at manipulating those who are untruth. Daniel is another great example of that, but I'll get into that later when I get into some of my dislikes. And lastly, number 6, the responsibility question. This movie asks a really difficult and complicated question of the viewer, which is exactly how responsible is Mia for her actions. It throws to the peer pressure and familial trauma angles in to make it more difficult to answer. And the immediate reaction is that Mia is at least responsible for the initial gruesome disfigurement of Riley. But even at this point, Mia had already gone over the 90 seconds, and the spirits had enough of a hold of her to manipulate her with the use of her mother. So the question comes up again. Was she in control of the decision to let Riley use the hand? Or does this lie with the demons as well? Then we are left with the very first time Mia uses the hand. You think, well, even if the hand possessed her actions from then on, she should have known better than to use it in the first place. She should have heeded the warning of Jade and her own skepticism and not used the hand. Even then, however, she is goaded into using the hand. Once she first uses it and sees that it's real, she's scared enough to back off. She reconsiders doing it at all. But then she goes right ahead and does it anyway. But she does this because of the peer pressure. So this begs the question, is that a good enough reason? Is she responsible for that decision? How is she responsible for that decision? I don't see how Mia can have sole responsibility for any of her own actions, but that begs the question, does any addict really have sole responsibility over their actions? The spirits seem to be immediately attracted to Mia and Riley. They hold on to Mia because she is vulnerable, and they use Riley in their manipulation because of the maternal relationship that Mia has to him. It's possible that Riley's injury was never as severe as we thought. It's briefly suggested in the movie that this is the case. We see the movie through the perspective of Mia, so it's hard for us to tell what's real and what isn't. The spirits distort our version of reality as well as Mia's version of reality. And all of this harkens back to the relationship between the hand and drug addiction. The progression of Mia's usage of the hand to connect with her mother follows the progression of a drug addiction, and it leaves you with nothing other than the question of who is responsible for a life that slips away once somebody is possessed by such evil. It certainly isn't all on the addict, or is it? Can you really boil things down to the one decision? It really does feel like possession is the best metaphor to use for this. Moving on to the dislikes, starting with the incomplete nature of Daniel's character arc, or rather, the non-existence of Daniel's character arc. Throughout the film, it's suggested that Daniel is gay, and the lead up to this starts very, very early, and it ends up culminating in Daniel's spirit possessor saying,
"He hates it when you touch him. You make him soft."
And then he ends up on the floor making out with a dog. Don't worry, I won't show you that. Daniel even half-heartedly confirms my suspicion when he suggests to Mia that he believes the spirits can see your thoughts, essentially telling the audience that the spirits revealed something truthful about him. I think this detail about Daniel is used to give some more context to the nature of lies and the spirit relationship with them. And that is all fine, but I do wish there was some resolution to this plot point, but it really goes unaddressed after these few moments. Having this plot thread without making it contribute to the story in any major way doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it was an unnecessary detail that ultimately left the movie feeling a little bit unfinished. Speaking of unfinished characters, number 2. Joss and Haley. Haley I can largely forgive for being a side character. They serve their purpose and move on. But Joss kind of plays a substantial role in the key question this movie asks of its viewer. Joss knows what happened to Duckett, and he continues using the hand and letting other people use it, and doesn't tell them. In a lot of ways, I think Joss is the primary villain of this movie. He's the dealer who is knowingly disingenuous about the risk of the product he's selling, but he's basically not involved in the plot at all. As I wrote this, it occurred to me that it may have been done intentionally, because pulling focus to the misdeeds of Joss perhaps distracts from the actions of Mia and the moral questions that those bring up, but I still think this could have been done better. If Joss also faced some kind of consequence for his actions, or at least taken a little more heat when we find out he knew what happened to Duckett, I think this would have been a lot better, and it's another thing that feels just slightly unresolved to me. Lastly, on the dislike side, number 3, the shock value. If you aren't prepared to feel nauseous from the gruesome scenes in this movie, don't watch it. For me, it was too much, and I have a pretty high tolerance for stuff like this. The scene between Daniel and the dog is so graphic and so long, it is so unsettling. It feels very gratuitous, but I think this is intentional. It's meant to be a clear show that something is seriously wrong here, that the kids openly ignore. But it's still too much for me. It really doesn't take away from the movie. It's mostly a personal gripe, and a warning if you haven't seen it. Once Daniel starts touching himself and moaning, skip ahead about 30 seconds. You don't want to live with the image in your head. Also, the gruesome beating that Riley takes goes a little further than it needs to, and it's fairly upsetting as well. This is also a sign of how much this needed to stop prior. As much as Daniel was a sign to stop this, Riley is the sign of why you should have stopped this. It also shows shows us how far gone the mind of Mia is, but it is particularly difficult to watch. Finally, to score this movie, starting with the plot, this is one of the most well-structured plots I have seen in a movie. It flows well, it holds the tension, it keeps the viewer engaged well. The rise and fall of the plot is fantastic, and it happens amazingly quickly with just a 90-minute runtime. 8 out of 10. It's fantastic. This leads me directly into the writing. The amount that this movie gets done in such a short period of time is nothing short of spectacular. Every detail feels meticulously thought out and woven into other portions of the film. It actually made writing this script difficult because of how dense and interconnected it is. There are multiple thematic elements that directly impact each other often. When movies are well written but not exceptional, I find myself saying things like the dialogue felt natural, and this is still true in this movie, but it's nowhere near the most impressive thing about the writing. From the pacing of this movie to the interwoven themes and the detail of the character development in this movie, it's fantastically well written. 9 out of 10. Bringing us to the themes. I already talked about this quite a bit, talking about addiction and the lying themes, but the amount of ways these themes converge is amazing, and I think it's true to life. Addiction does take advantage of dishonesty. In fact, I think dishonesty is the primary driver of most of life's evils, so building that as a core part into this film I think is brilliant. I also love a demonic possession angle. I think that the reason the idea of demonic possession ever came about was because the people commit great evil acts, start to go down a path of addiction, or just start going through life suffering, they often feel like they are possessed. And in many ways, they are. People start losing control of themselves very quickly when possessed by the shadow. And this is what happens when you live lies. Your shadow possesses you and takes control of your conscious being. My only real complaint with the theme is while trying to explain through it all, it does feel like a little bit too much for the runtime. And for this reason, it only gets an 8 out of 10. Moving on to the cinematography. There isn't anything particularly special here. There are a few scenes that stand out as very creatively shot and well done, but it's very technically well done, but it doesn't bring a lot of nuance to the table, so I think a 7 out of 10 is fair. Finally, the characters. The characters in this movie for the most part are fantastic. They have coherent arcs and serve a direct purpose. I think by the nature of sticking to a tight runtime, some things were lost with some of the side characters, but all of the main characters have serious emotional depth, which makes the impact of the horror scenes exceptionally high. It's at the top of its class when developing these parasocial emotional connections between the characters and the audience, so it gets a 9 out of 10 for the characters. Overall, I love this movie. Reviewing it was a lot of fun, and I was by no means disappointed having to watch it 3 times to feel like I could reasonably write everything about it. Overall, it gets a score of 8 out of 10. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss my next video on a horror classic, American Psycho.